Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to chapter 5 of the book of Mark. If this is your first time watching me here, my name is Stav and we're going through the Gospel of Mark together as a way to get you guys to really dive into the Word. And my heart is really just to show you guys how cool the Bible is, how amazing the story is, and how God just weaves the whole thing together from beginning to end, even though the Bible's made up of 66 books, written by over 40 different authors, over 1,500 years. It all ties in together. And they all had different professions. It's just amazing when you really see it. So I just want to show you guys how cool the Bible is. It's not outdated by any means. It's a book that we've been given by the Lord himself to help us, to reveal himself to us. And I just love reading it, and I want you guys to love reading it too. So now we're in chapter 5 of the book of Mark, and there's 3 really important stories that happen in this chapter. I mean, everything that happens is important, but these are 3 very big moments where we really see Jesus healing 3 different people of 3 different things. So I'm going to read a section at a time. I'm reading the CSB translation. If you have a different one, that's totally cool. Sometimes it's nice to hear the different words that the translators use. I'm also going to include links down below where you can find an online Bible if you don't have one, or you can just listen. And before we get started, I put all of the references I'm going to use and the scriptures I'm going to be talking about in the description of this video per your requests. I thought that was a great idea so you guys could mark off where we're going to be beforehand. And I'm also going to show a little bubble here with a scripture that I'm currently on, just so everybody can kind of stay on track, because I do like to go back and forth between different books, because like I said, it all connects and some passages give us more depth as we study. So here we go. I'm going to read Mark 5 verses 1 through 20. This is one story, so let's read it from beginning to end and then we'll talk about it. They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs, and no one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him, and he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" he asked him. "My name is Legion," he answered him, "because we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. Verse 11. A large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. The demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. The men who tended them ran off and reported it in the town and the countryside, and people went to see what happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs. Then they began to beg him to leave their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. Jesus did not let him, but told him, "Go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So Jesus is with his disciples. They're crossing part of the Sea of Galilee, and they get to this region where there's a man who's been living in the tombs. He's possessed by a demon, or multiple demons, as we find out. He's torturing himself, basically, cutting himself, hurting himself. He screams and yells all the time, and he's basically outcast. Like, nobody can handle this guy. And I think that in this day and age, it can be easy to brush aside the whole spiritual realm. We think that all that there is what we can see and touch. But the Bible shows us that there is an entirely different realm within ours that we can't necessarily always see. And as believers, I think it's important to know this. It's vitally important to know this, But it's important also not to dwell on it, because I think that, like, demons to me and angels are super interesting. They are God's creatures. Angels are not dead people. I think that a lot of people have that misconception, but angels are not dead people. And demons, it seems, are fallen angels. So there's this whole other spiritual realm that we don't see. God himself is a spiritual being. He came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ and lived among the humans as a human, but he was still God, he still is God, and he's a spiritual being. So there is this other realm that we cannot necessarily see, but that we can for sure interact with. And I think that can be like a slippery slope. You don't want to dwell on the whole demonic thing too much, because I do see that happening where people like blame everything on the demonic. When the truth is, we also have our flesh that we have to deal with. So if I'm having a problem, it might not necessarily be that I'm being like attacked by the enemy, but it could also just be my flesh. So there has to be a balance there. We need to be aware of it, but we shouldn't dwell on it. So just to illustrate this point, we're going to go to our first reference. This is in the book of Ephesians. So it's going to be in chapter 6, verse 12. And here we learn what this spiritual warfare truly is. And I don't think you can read this passage and then say that there is no spiritual warfare. Let's just read it. So the book of Ephesians, Paul is writing this letter. It's a letter to the church in Ephesus. So here he's talking about warfare. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. Then he talks about the armor of God, which is how we fight against these things. So even when I'm having like a disagreement with somebody, I try to keep this in mind, because I'm not fighting against that person necessarily. I'm fighting against the enemy that wants to cause division. That could be spiritual warfare. And I think it's important to be aware of that, because it takes us out of this temporary earthly problem if we see it in a more eternal lens. Is this argument I'm having with somebody going to cause division and cause eternal problems? So it's just really important to be aware that spiritual warfare is an actual thing. The spirit realm is real. God created the physical world. He created our physical selves, but he also gave us a soul, a spirit, which is supernatural. And I think that we can think about the word supernatural as this fake, like science fiction doesn't really exist thing. But the word super, which I think is Latin, means above or beyond. It's beyond nature or above nature. It's a different part of this world. And I always think of the movie, I think it was Constantine, where I feel like I've been referencing Keanu Reeves movies a lot on this channel. But in Constantine, I can't really remember the whole plot of the movie, but there's this part where Constantine is shown the spiritual realm in the physical realm. So like his eyes are open and now he can see all of these, I think they were demons, like amongst the people, and nobody else can see them.
The world behind the world, and we're smack in the middle.
But they are a real thing. They can inhabit people, as we see in the Bible. Jesus heals people of unclean spirits quite a few times. So we know that it's real. We know that that's a real thing, and we should be aware of it. I think that we do ourselves a disservice by just totally pushing aside the idea that the supernatural exists, because we are part natural and part supernatural, as our supernatural or outside of nature creator made us. I feel like I could talk about that forever, but we have a lot to talk about here. Oh, I did want to mention this book. Hold on a second. Okay, I just dropped a million books. Okay, I read this book. I think I was in my early 20s, and this is not my original copy, because my original copy has writing and highlights all up in it. I think I let someone borrow it, but this book is amazing. If you haven't read it, C.S. Lewis writes it, it's letters being written back and forth between two demons. One demon is like a demon trainee And he's being taught by the other demon how to pull people away from God. So it's really eye-opening to see the tactics that the enemy uses, and it's written in this cool like back and forth letter form, and a lot of it is just so eye-opening. I'm gonna link this book down below so you guys can check it out if you haven't read it already, but it's one of my absolute favorite books of all time. Definitely one of my favorite C.S. Lewis books. Okay, so back in Mark, we've got this guy who has these unclean spirits and nobody can subdue him. So we see here in verse 4, it says, no one was strong enough to subdue him. And if you guys remember, a few chapters ago, we learned about the strong man. So this is in Mark chapter 3, verse 27, where Jesus gives them a parable of the strong man. He says, but no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder his house. And here we learn that Jesus was talking about himself tying up the enemy. So now we've got this strong man here in chapter 5. No one can control him, and Jesus is the one who ends up subduing him. So then in verse 5, we read that he's crying out, cutting himself with stones. He's harming himself. And there's a verse that says, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. The enemy just wants to cause harm. He wants to cause division. He wants people to hurt themselves ultimately, sometimes leading to an eternity away from God in that sense of harm. But sometimes it can be in the form of physical harm, harming ourselves or each other. So this guy is suffering and being tormented by the enemy. And we see here that when he sees Jesus, he runs to him and kneels down before him. Just remember that. Okay, and he says, what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? And we see over and over again that the demons know who Jesus is, but they don't necessarily know what he's doing here. I don't think that they know that he's going to die on the cross, be resurrected, and defeat them ultimately through that. He says, I beg you before God, don't torment me, for he had told him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Now, the books of Matthew and Luke also give an account of this same story. So in Luke, we're gonna go to Luke chapter 8, verse 31, because the demon says something in this one that is actually very interesting, and I think something that we need to note. So he tells Jesus that his name is Legion because there's many demons, and they begged him not to banish them into the abyss. So they don't want to be thrown into the abyss. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 8, verse 29, and look at what Matthew records them saying there. It's interesting to see the same story from different perspectives because they give different details based on what they thought needs to be told. So in Matthew 8, verse 29, it says, suddenly they shouted, what do you have to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? What is this time they're talking about? So they don't seem to know what Jesus is doing here at this time, but they do know that their ultimate end will come. So now we're gonna go to Revelation 20:10, where we see what this end is. What's gonna happen to these demons in the end? The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So the demons know that they're gonna be thrown into the abyss. They know that in the end they will be punished, but in the meantime, they're trying to take as many people away from the Lord as they possibly can, and just generally wreak havoc on the earth. So they know they're gonna have an end, and they're like, what are you doing here right now? So now we're back in Mark chapter 5 and verse 9. So Jesus asks him, what's your name? And the demons reply, Legion, for we are many. Meaning this poor man did not only have one unclean spirit, but thousands of unclean spirits tormenting him. And I think there's a lot that we don't understand about demons. I think there could be different types of demons, and we're given information about them in the Bible, but we're not given all the information about them. This poor man is being tormented by thousands of demons, and a legion is a Roman military unit that was generally, I think, around 6,000 people. But we know here because of the herd of pigs, those were 2,000 pigs. There could have been multiple demons per pig, right? So it was a lot. It was a lot of unclean spirits. All right, so verse 11, a large herd of pigs was there feeding on the hillside. And we know that pigs were unclean for Jews. So I think that the general consensus about this area is that this was a Gentile region, and this man was probably a Gentile. So the demons beg him, "Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. So they didn't want to leave that area. They wanted to stick around, and they went into the pigs with Jesus's permission. They wouldn't have been able to just do it without him giving them permission in that moment. And the spirits entered the pigs, and then the entire herd of 2,000 pigs runs off this cliff and they all die. And reading different commentaries and listening to different explanations of this, I think there's a lot we don't know about this pig situation and like the nature of demons and why they drowned the pigs. But then the men who were tending the pigs ran off and told pretty much everybody, and then everybody wanted to know what happened. So I think that God always has a purpose for the way that things happen, even though some of it might not really make sense to us at the time. We might not understand the purpose behind something, but I think that Jesus obviously knows what he's doing here. So they came to Jesus, verse 15, and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there dressed and in his right mind. So reading this now, it seems as though if that thing didn't happen with the pigs, where they all ran off the cliff and died, the herdsmen would not have run into the town of what seems like it was mostly Gentiles and told them what had happened. And then those people wouldn't have come and seen this demon-possessed man, this man that they knew nobody could control. He's now dressed. We read in, I think it's either Matthew or Luke, that he was naked before. He's now dressed, he's talking, he's totally fine. So they might not have all seen that, like all those witnesses might not have seen that if the herdsmen didn't go and tell everyone about the pigs. So that's really interesting. And they were afraid, which makes sense, because like, here's this guy who they all knew was out of his mind. Nobody could help him, and now he seems fine. So they're all afraid, and they hear about what happened, and they beg Jesus to leave that area. Even though he healed this man, I think they're afraid, and they just don't understand. So they're trying to get him to get out of there. Like, please leave here. We don't know what just happened. We don't understand it, but we're afraid. And then the demon-possessed man begs Jesus to go with him, but Jesus tells him to go home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Now this is interesting because Jesus says, report to them how much the Lord has done for you. Who healed this man? It was Jesus, right? And Jesus is saying that the Lord did this. So Jesus is saying that he is the Lord. Mark once again is highlighting Jesus is God. He's showing us this. So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and they were all amazed. So now the word is spreading in that region about Jesus. I think that one of the main takeaways from this story that I got from it is that nobody is too far gone to be saved. The things that you've done, the things that I've done, nothing can separate us from the love of God if we believe. It's just, there's nothing that he can't save you from. There's nothing that he can't forgive in your heart if you surrender to him and give him your heart. So don't think that you're too far gone, that you've done too many bad things. This man had thousands of demons tormenting him day and night, and Jesus with a word can just heal him. So if he can do that, just think of what he can do for you. Okay, so now let's go to verse 21 and we'll finish reading Mark 5 and then we'll go back and talk about these two people. So when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, he's like, beep, boop, beep, boop. A large crowd gathered around him while he was by the sea. One of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, "My little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so that she can get well and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing against him. Now a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing, for she said, "If I just touch his clothing, I'll be made well." Instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he was looking around to see who had done this. The woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." While he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue leader's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." He did not let anyone accompany him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. They came to the leader's house, and he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, but he put them all outside. He took the child's father, mother, and those who were with him, and entered the place where the child was. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. At this, they were utterly astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So Jesus has this huge crowd gathering around him. And Jairus, who's one of the leaders of the synagogue, comes to Jesus and says, "My daughter's dying, please come help her." And for Jairus to come to Jesus, for this leader in the synagogue to come to Jesus for help, that in itself says a lot, because most of the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders of the time rejected Jesus and thought that he was a problem. They were trying to figure out a way to have him killed, ultimately. And so Jairus, to come to him, he obviously recognizes the truth about Jesus and knows that he can heal his daughter, so he comes to him for help. So Jesus is going with him, and now this huge crowd is gathered around Jesus, so much so that they're pressed up against him. Like, if you're ever on the train on a busy morning and people are just like Elaine and Seinfeld, like, there's no room. So people are all pressed up against him. So now this woman comes and kind of interrupts the story. And she was suffering from bleeding for 12 years. That's a long time to be dealing with something like that. But she's probably an outcast because she's considered unclean and nobody can help her. The doctors can't find a cure. She spent all her money trying to find help for this affliction she has, and nothing's working. So she hears about Jesus. She sees that he's there, and she goes and she just wants to touch him, because she has so much faith that if I can just touch this man, even if he doesn't look at me or talk to me, I'll be healed. And so she makes her way through the crowd, finally gets to a place where she can touch his clothing. And immediately when she touches him, she can feel that she's healed. Her affliction that she had for 12 years is gone. And when this happens, Jesus stops. And in verse 31, we see he says, "Who touched me?" Because he feels the power go out from him. Now, obviously, Jesus being God, he knows what just happened. He knows this woman. He knew her from before she was formed in her mother's womb. So he knows what's going on. But he makes a point to stop and to show everybody what just happened. So everyone in the town probably knew this woman as being unclean. They knew her story and what was going on with her, and she was like an outcast. So this woman, who's now afraid because he kind of called her out, she comes and falls down before him. And this is the third time in this chapter that we see someone falling down before Jesus. We see the demon-possessed man knelt down before him. In verse 22, we see Jairus fell at Jesus' feet. And now, here in verse 33, the woman falls down before him. I don't know about you, but in order for me to like kneel down before someone, like what would that person's status have to be, you know? They obviously know that Jesus is who he says he is. I mean, the demons know for sure. Jairus knows who he is. He has faith that he can heal his daughter. And now this woman comes, she's healed by him. She knows who he is. She had the faith, and she kneels before him. She knows that he is the Lord. And he calls her daughter. He doesn't call her by her name. He doesn't call her woman. He calls her daughter. Like, that's such an intimate title to give to somebody. It's like, you are my child. You're not just this person. You're my child. I'm your father. Oh, it's just so beautiful. So he says to her, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." So he shows everybody, this woman who was an outcast, she had so much faith in him that all she wanted to do was touch him so that she knew that she would be healed. And that's similar to when Jesus healed the paralytic in chapter 2. He says something similar. Your faith has healed you, to the paralytic. They all have this faith in who Jesus is. And as believers, we have that faith. We know who Jesus is, and we know that he heals. So now people are coming from Jairus' house and telling him, hey Jairus, your daughter died, don't bother Jesus anymore, there's no point. And Jesus hears this and he's like, hold up. He doesn't say hold up. He says to Jairus, don't be afraid, this is in verse 36, don't be afraid, only believe. That's all Jairus had to do. You don't have to do this, this, and this. All you have to do is believe. And I highlighted that verse, don't be afraid, only believe. Because how much does that apply to us? All we have to do is believe, that's it. Jesus says in John 3:16, probably the most well-known verse in the entire Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him, just believe in him, will not perish but have eternal life. That's all we have to do. So now Jesus is going to Jairus' house and he takes Peter, James, and John, James's brother. So those are like his 3 guys. Those are his closest, his people. So he takes them and then he gets to the house and there are all these mourners. And back then people used to hire mourners as well. So there's all these people weeping and wailing, and he goes in and says, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead but asleep. And by their standards and our standards, we would have said that she's dead. But Jesus knows that he can wake her up. He can bring her back. He has control over demonic spirits. He has control over our spirits. He can take our dead body and bring the spirit back and bring that body to life. He can resurrect the dead. So they laugh at him, which I wouldn't recommend. And then he sends them all out. He takes Peter, James, and John and the girl's parents, and he goes to where the child is, takes her by the hand, and says, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Again, just a word, just words. Immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old, and everyone was astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. Again, he's saying, like, I did this, but don't go around and tell everybody. I can only imagine if you found out that there was someone going around who can resurrect the dead, he would just get mobbed, right? So it's not the time. So he's saying, don't tell anybody, but give her something to eat. But obviously, this girl's gonna get up and get out of her house at some point and everyone's gonna see her. But he doesn't want them to make this a big thing yet. It's not the time. He knows that there will come an appropriate time when everybody's gonna tell who he is, but it's not yet. So that's the end of chapter 5. So much to think about. Overall, we see that Jesus has complete control over storms, demons, disease, death, everything. He is the Lord. And I think that that is the main focus of Mark, is that he's just trying to show us that Jesus is who he says he is. He is the living God come to us. So let me know if you guys have any thoughts below. Again, I'm just a student of the Bible. I love reading it, love understanding it. I pray for understanding every day. So if you guys want to share some thoughts you had with me, I'd love to read them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you in the next one for chapter 6. Stay blessed. Bye.